Hi everyone, it's Dr. Sanjeev Goel from Peak Human Labs, and today we have Carmelia.
Hi.
And we have a very special request for a topic today. We're going to be talking about ADHD. And yeah, let's get started. Do you want to talk about why is this kind of important to you? Or?
I don't know why. It's important to me because I have it, and I think that I've been doing my own I've been very curious about the impact of ADHD in women in particular. I'm also, I got a lot of things going on. I'm over 50, so I'm going through hormonal changes, plus ADHD, and so I really want to just open that dialogue about it. And part of that motivation was watching a Mel Robbins podcast where she was diagnosed with ADHD accidentally at the age of 47 when she was at school for her son being diagnosed, and then they're like, you possibly have it.
Sure.
Really? And what I was surprised about is that for many women, supposedly, statistics say that a lot of women are misdiagnosed or not diagnosed effectively because they tend to attach or not blame. They say that they have anxiety or depression instead of ADHD. I thought that we should talk about the symptoms themselves, the presentation of that, and then you said you had a test. So,
well, let's just talk about what is ADHD.
Yes,
that's the first step. When we went through medical school, we normally thought about kids having ADD,
correct,
or ADHD, and the three major categories of symptoms are inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And so those three things, when we saw, you normally had this idea when this kid was running around out of control, hyperactive, that was the sign of ADHD. That's how normally this was being diagnosed.
Right.
And what we found was that people were saying there was a rash, like an epidemic of kids being put on Ritalin. And the concern was that, oh my God, do we actually have more ADHD, or are we just over-diagnosing it? At some point, they took away the H part because they felt that the hyperactivity part was not a critical piece of the diagnosis.
So there's ADD and then ADHD, right?
Exactly, and ADD is good enough.
Okay.
It's impulsivity and distractibility.
Okay, so there's a difference between ADD and ADHD.
No, I think they're the same thing.
They're similar? Okay.
What I'm saying is that the hyperactive part's not necessary anymore.
Okay.
Because there's, like you said, there is a version of people who are not hyperactive but still have ADD.
Correct. Okay.
Or ADHD, if you want to call it that. But then what we started realizing over the last, I think, 20 years now is that there's ADD in adults. Before that was not really known, but nowadays you can see how much people are using ADD medications even when they're adults because they found out that they likely had it as kids. They were not diagnosed.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily just leave you. You don't just grow out of it. You likely have it as an adult even if you had it as a kid.
Yeah, so from the scientific point of view, can you talk a little bit about the brain and why it has such a difficult time concentrating? Because when I look at videos, there's so many videos about people with ADHD, and you compare they call a I forget the term now, but there's regular neuro people and then there's neurodivergent people.
Neurodiverse is just a way of saying there's different skills and aptitudes of different brains.
Okay.
So instead of saying that we all are in a different range of different skills and aptitudes.
Okay.
And instead of saying something's bad or good, or there's a disease and not disease, we're using now the word neurodiverse. It means that people have different brains.
Right.
And, And some people are just different. People are different in many different ways in their brains.
Okay.
But what's happening in ADD? We think that in the prefrontal cortex is where all the organization and planning happens.
Okay.
And if there's some type of, again, neurodivergency of that part of the brain that makes these people who have ADD a little different, where they have a little bit more problem with keeping focus on a particular area. Rather, it's not that they can't focus, is they just can't focus sometimes on what they want to necessarily focus on. They can remain focused on certain things and they can't remain focused on other things.
Well, there's some, obviously the terminology, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder. Attention deficit, you can't pay attention, right? Or you have difficulty paying attention. I experience that daily. Yet, there's a lot of people with ADHD that can be high functioning, but they're high functioning periodically, right? So that when they can focus, there's things that someone has to do, like myself, to remain focused. My phone can't be somewhere, people can't be moving around necessarily. And then also, I tend to be okay in really noisy environments. I'm okay with a lot of stuff going on because my brain likes that, actually. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, it just means that, like I said, is that it doesn't necessarily mean you can't focus. It just means that you can't focus sometimes like the same way other people can focus. And it might, again, give you an advantage. This idea that it's a negative thing is not necessarily true. Lots of very successful people have some symptoms of ADD that are not so bad enough to create problems in their life. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that they've said is that there's not enough data of women with ADHD, or most of the data is based on men. Yeah. And genetically and physiologically, men and women are different. Yes?
Yeah, no, for sure they're different and they present differently. So,
right.
And probably what happens is that boys more present as outwardly symptoms of ADHD. So, for example, they have more of those hyperactivity type symptoms.
Right.
And impulsivity symptoms. So it's very obvious for a teacher to notice that person is...
Where a girl may be not hyper, but she has a hard time paying attention. Yes. Her grades she may not, I don't know if expression has anything to do with it, or communication. I don't think I saw any research about that, but I know that mood can be altered,
They may present more the mood issues or anxiety issues, whereas in boys it might present as behavioral problems and conduct disorders and things like that. They do present differently, and when it's more external, then other people notice it, and they're more likely to be diagnosed. And more of the research was done on boys and men because more people have been diagnosed.
Yeah, and like you said, you can see that physically in people that are around. I feel like I present like a male, AD, because I'm physically like pretty involved and active and running around, right? Not everybody's like that. I want to ask,
how was it as a kid? What were you like in school?
I was really, I think I was better as a kid. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's
drama class, talkative, but my grades were exceptional. Like I excelled in grades, but I procrastinated. Like I knew the information. That's because my father made us study, right? But I didn't have problems. I felt like I was the kind of person that crammed. I was always a crammer. So I never did anything really study. I did it in spurts when I felt like it, right? But fortunately, I felt like it enough that my grades didn't really get impacted, right? I don't know if there's a relationship between people excelling or grades or being successful, because I think there are a lot of successful people who have ADHD.
Yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs are ADHD, have some tendencies towards that. If you don't mind, let's go through the self-report scale.
Please.
It's called the ADHD self-report scale. It's basically looks at two different domains, the inattention domain and the hyperactivity impulsivity domain. So it breaks down into those two different areas.
This is a self-test?
It's a self-test, 18 different questions, and you're gonna rank anywhere from never to very often. So it's a scale of never, rarely, sometimes, often, and very often. So,
and there's just 18 questions, okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you them quickly. We're going to go through them. You're just going to tell us what your answer is, and then I'm going to tell you what your score is. But for those of you out there, you can find this online. It's called the ADHD Self-Report Scale. We can put the link in the show notes. And yes, let's
let's do it.
And many of you may feel that I identify too. Many of us identify with this in today's world.
I'll answer as honestly as possible.
Sure.
Okay.
How often do you have trouble wrapping up the final details of a project once the challenging parts have been done?
Once the challenging parts so what do I have to say?
Never, all the way to very often. So never, rarely, sometimes, often.
And how often once the challenge part is done, how often? I would say not very often.
Okay, not often, so sometimes?
Sometimes.
How often do you have difficulty getting things in order when you have a task that requires organization?
That's difficult.
So often?
Yeah, I would say often.
Okay. How often do you have problems remembering appointments or obligations?
Often, not very often.
Okay. When you do have a task that requires a lot of thought, how often do you avoid or delay getting started?
I think I start a lot. I would say rarely.
Okay. Yeah. How often do you fidget or squirm with your hands or feet when you have to sit down for a long time?
Often. I'm doing it now. My daughter the other day says, stop flicking your toes.
Yeah. How often do you feel overly active and compelled to do things like you're driven by a motor?
Often.
Very often or often?
Very often.
Okay. Let's move on to part B now. How often do you make careless mistakes when you have to work on a boring or difficult project?
Not often.
Okay, so it's like rarely or sometimes?
I would say rarely.
Okay. How often do you have difficulty keeping your attention when you're doing boring or repetitive work?
Oh, that's a lot. Often. Very often. Yeah, very often.
How often do you have difficulty concentrating on people say to you, even when they're speaking to you directly?
What would you say, Sanjeev? Why are you laughing? Say it again.
Because I'm checking now.
Say it again. Say it again.
How often do you have difficulty concentrating on what people say to you, even when they're speaking to you directly?
Sometimes.
Every day.
Okay, often. Okay.
Yeah.
When I'm intentional, I listen. Okay.
How often do you misplace or have difficulty finding things at work or at home? I'll just answer
always.
That for
Yeah, you're going to answer that for me.
Very often.
Did I not just... Where's my keys? Where's
Exactly.
the keys?
How often are you distracted by activity or noise around you?
I'll say sometimes. I'm used to a lot of noise.
How often do you leave your seat in meetings or other situations in which you're expected to remain seating? Like in a conference, maybe.
I'll say sometimes.
Okay. How often do you feel restless or fidgety?
Very often.
How often do you have difficulty unwinding or relaxing when you have time to yourself?
Very often.
How often do you find yourself talking too much when you're in social situations?
I don't know, talking too much. Michaela, how would you answer that?
I think so.
Okay, often.
Okay,
That's my
often.
daughter in the background.
When you're in a conversation, how often do you find finishing the sentences of the people you are talking to before they can finish it themselves?
Guilty.
Often. Gonna go with often.
I feel so ADHD right now.
How often do you have difficulty waiting your turn in situations when turn taking is required?
Turn taking is I'll just say rarely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say rarely.
How often do you interrupt others when they are busy?
Often. Okay. When they're busy?
Yeah.
If I want something, I'll interrupt you. Often. Oh my God.
Okay. Yeah, okay, you have scores 5 out of possible 6 on part A and 9 out of 12 out of a possible 12 in part B. Scores of 4 to 6 are indicative of symptoms consistent. So you obviously have higher scores are consistent. So yeah, you fit the scale. Again,
you know me personally,
yeah,
so
no, I think
was I accurate?
Yeah, I think you're accurate.
It was
Maybe
accurate?
some of them could have been very off.
Yeah. See, the thing is, I also work in a professional environment, so when I would never speak out of turn depending on the situation.
Yeah.
And if I'm really interested in a topic, I'm front row and center, and I won't leave because I'm so into it.
That's what I'm saying.
right?
That sometimes people with ADHD, they can focus on
Yeah.
certain things. It's not that they can't.
Yeah.
So it's not.
But having done the test, what would I do with that information? Just know where I land?
Well, it's good to know because then people do use medications.
I know.
and
And
they're quite effective.
Can you talk a little bit about what the medication does to an ADHD brain? Is it different for every person?
Yeah, the neurochemical basis, I'd really have to get back to you about that.
Okay.
I believe it works on dopamine and norepinephrine, but
Okay.
How it exactly affects this focus part, I can't exactly tell you that. But there are many different medications out there. Ritalin was the first one, was the first major medication. Out of them have come many new medications.
So what I understood, Ritalin is mainly prescribed for children because of the dosage amount, and then there's different variants depending on how severe somebody's ADHD is. Is that correct?
I think Ritalin was the first one that was available. It's a bit shorter acting. So the concern that was with some of these medications that it led to growth problems, that there was people could potentially not grow as tall if they were using Ritalin. Mm-hmm. So the idea was that you would not be on Ritalin all the time. You would take breaks on it, maybe only take it on school days. And the other benefit of Ritalin is because it was short acting, so it only lasted like half the day.
Here's I read this stat. It said impacts of misunderstanding female ADHD. Long-term issues such as self-medicating, addiction, eating disorders, chronic pain, self-harm, and suicide attempts from misunderstanding it. The importance of proper support and understanding, especially during hormonal changes. Hormonally, for women, there are so many different things that can happen. Can you share some of the things that can happen when a woman's hormonal?
Oh, well, just before the period, there's definitely changes that are happening with the...
Or menopause, or different symptoms?
Before the period, it's a premenstrual syndrome where estrogen and progesterone both drop significantly, does cause mood changes. And then, of course, at menopause, we also see a huge drop in progesterone and estrogen as well.
Okay.
And so that can also cause mood changes.
Do you know in your research of ADHD or anything if exercise would help any of these symptoms or hyperactivity?
Of course, exercise generally releases endorphins, makes you feel better, improves your mood in general. I'm not sure it doesn't change the other hormones, but
right.
But it just generally makes you feel better. It reduces anxiety levels, improves your mood.
And is this a genetic thing? If I had ADHD, could my children have ADHD? Is this a chemical thing, or is it hereditary?
I think there's probably a very big chance that there's some genetic basis to it.
Okay.
And there may be also an environmental aspect. The nurture part could also be there, because it could be that our society is, the way it's constructed, is creating more ADHD in promoting environments. For example, if there's so much distraction going on all the time, it's very hard. The brain is being pushed in that direction. So with all of technology and constant multitasking, for example. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you look at, let's say if you developed a meditation practice, it probably would help your ADHD.
Right.
And there is now neurobiofeedback treatments where they can train your brain waves to help improve that ADHD. So it is changeable. Medication is not the only way of dealing with it.
Yeah, I think one of the tips that I read was, like, obviously to seek a specialist for accurate diagnosis. One of these tests can help, and then just education and awareness of how it impacts women differently. Mm-hmm. As you said, I think women tend to internalize, and from what I also read is women, for whatever reason, they're less likely to report on their ADHD. I don't know why.
Yeah, because maybe they're not exactly sure that's what it is. Maybe.
Yeah, because even Mel Robbins only found out at the age of 47, right?
There's less of a stigma than, let's say, saying that you're depressed or anxious. People don't want to necessarily report those things. What
would you advise people who are, like me, are constantly losing keys? Do you think because it's funny and not funny, creating a structure to put your keys in the same place. My mother always, put your keys right here. Well, if I could put my keys right there, I would. Do I just got to live with losing my keys forever? Or the medication?
That's what I'm saying. The medication is extremely effective. And like I said, perhaps some mindfulness practice.
Okay.
And you're right, proper sleep and exercise will probably all make a difference. And other treatments that look at brain training, brainwave training would probably also help as well. But
ooh, what's brainwave training?
Yeah,
you heard of it? Have you tried it?
I haven't done it. I have never had the treatment, but through neurobiofeedback, they basically attach electrodes to your brain. They can see the different brain waves, and they can train your brain like through a game.
I want to see that.
Train you through helping with ADHD.
Yeah, you don't want to probably put a note on my brain. Well, thank you so much for diving into those different symptoms. We shared where the test is.
Yep.
I know that you have supplements for brain and things of that nature. Do you think that might help people?
Again, I wouldn't want to, promise anything I don't think it's, we're not 100%, we don't have enough research.
Right.
They wouldn't necessarily work for this issue. Again, I think just lifestyle issues, potentially the medications would work.
Okay.
Yeah, and they work really well, yeah.
Awesome.
So everyone, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and if you enjoyed watching this, please subscribe. It goes a long way to making sure other people get to see this video and learn about ADHD.
Thank you.
Thank you.